first absolutely commend it to the House. Thank you.
I'll call the Honourable Dr Nick Smith.
Madam Speaker, there are two essential questions that Parliament needs to focus on with the Earthquakes Insurance Tribunal Bill. And the first of those is, will this result in speedier settlements for those people that still have claims? And secondly, will it result in more just settlements for those that have outstanding insurance claims? And I want to focus on those two questions in the contribution on this first reading. But before doing so, it is appropriate that we acknowledge today the 8th anniversary of the massive earthquake centred in Darfield that very early in the morning shook Canterbury back in 2010. I'm a former Canterbury lad and have drifted a little north. I spent a good part of my university time studying earthquakes, and what occurred that day will rate as one of the largest civil defence economic challenges that this country has faced. And I want to put on record the effort by people like Jerry Brownlee, like John Key and Nicky Wagner in the intervening 8 years to address those huge challenges. I heard the previous speaker note that the government was spending $1.5 million on this tribunal. I'd just like them to take a moment to reflect on the $17 billion that National committed in government to coming to the aid to the people of Canterbury over that huge disaster that affected all of our country. When I reflect on, if I take the new bus exchange, if I take the temporary stadium, if I look at the new Justice Precinct, and I was in Christchurch yesterday, the way in which Christchurch has rebuilt itself over the last 8 years is a tremendous story of which New Zealand, Canterbury and the previous government can take great pride. I want to firstly focus on the question of whether this will result in speedier settlements. And I do have to say to government members that I read that the regulatory impact statement from the government's own officials says this, and I quote, "Claims may take just as long or longer to be resolved through the new tribunal process than is the status quo." That's what the government's officials are saying about this bill. And the reason I have a degree of cynicism around all the promise that's associated with this bill is, can I just clock back to a previous experience for this Parliament? In 2002, a previous Labor government under Clayton Cosgrove introduced the Weathertight Homes Tribunal with a near identical process as is set out here. And whether that Weathertight Homes process was introduced into this Parliament in 2002, the then government, a Labor government as well, promised that all of the claims would be settled in 2 years. Go back, check the Hansard. I have. They said all the claims would be settled in 2 years. Do you know what portion of claims were settled within 2 years? Not all. 3% were settled in 2 years. Even after 4 years, only 7% of claims. And the Weathertight Homes Tribunal actually took 14 years to get the job done. And so when I hear Labor members introducing this bill and pretending it is a panacea to the difficult remaining insurance claims in Christchurch, I would love either the ministers or one of the other government members to explain why it will be different than the very disappointing experience with the previous Labor government's attempts over the Weathertight Homes Tribunal. I also want to challenge members opposite in respect of the record of settlement of insurance claims in Christchurch. This was the largest insurance claims, not just in New Zealand, but in 2010-11, there were more insurance claims generated in New Zealand than all of the developed world. Isn't that extraordinary? In little New Zealand, we had over 260,000 insurance claims. 260,000 insurance claims. And so when I hear members opposite trying to deride and denigrate the record of the previous national government, in which 98.5% of those claims are settled, I think they are being a little naive and they're being a little unfair. Here's a simple challenge for Labour members. How many claims and by when will be settled by this tribunal? Okay, I've heard Megan Woods decry my colleague Jerry Brownlee for years on this issue, put some pegs in the ground and give us some commitment. Okay, we're going to face a new election in September of 2020. We know from this bill there are 3,800 claims still outstanding. I ask a member opposite, how many of those 3,800 claims will be resolved by the time when we go to the polls in 2020? Is there a member opposite that can give an answer and a commitment? The silence is deafening, because while the rhetoric is strong, members opposite are not prepared to put their money where their mouth is and actually connect some performance with this bill. And the second point that seems to be lost on members of the government is that when you change the contracts around insurance, that it is a free good. It is not. Any New Zealander who has received an insurance bill from Kataia to Bluff in the last 12 months knows the huge increase in costs facing families as a consequence of when they go to secure their insurance, whether it be through the EQC, the Earthquake War Damages Commission, or whether it be in terms of their private insurance. And here's the bit the members opposite forget. Every time you impose an additional cost or you extend the entitlements with respect to insurance claims...
Order. Just stop referring to the...
When the government extends those insurance entitlements, there is a real cost for other New Zealanders, and whether it be in the housing sector or in the insurance market or any other sector, they are imposing costs on New Zealanders. And so I'm very supportive of the statements made by Stuart Smith, my parliamentary colleague from next door in Kaikoura, who's had enormous experience with these issues and is raising the quite legitimate question as to, for all the rhetoric, is this tribunal going to make a positive difference? And I do, Madam Chair, need to question the urgency. Labor announced in its policy when it became the government that this legislation would be introduced as quickly as possible. Well, it's nearly 12 months since this government was elected. The Select Committee process is going to take a further 6 months. Did the electors of Canterbury really believe that the first tribunal hearing will be in the latter part of 2019? And does that match up with the rhetoric and the promise that Labor members made in Christchurch when they said that this tribunal would be put in place? I think not, Madam Chair. My colleague Stuart Smith has also raised some quite legitimate questions about the specifics of this bill as to whether it will improve the timeliness and the justice of the outcomes from the insurance settlement process. And the evidence that's in the officials' regulatory impact statement on this bill and the experience previously of the Weathertight Homes Tribunal raises real questions as to the rhetoric from government ministers and the reality. And so again I say to members opposite, if we are to believe that this bill is going to deliver all that they say, why will the government not commit to specific targets? Why will they not commit? We know at the moment that about 1,000 claims are being settled per year. How many more are going to be settled more quickly by this tribunal? How do we know that the outcomes are going to be more just when the very process that has been set up has received quite substantive criticisms from those that are there. And let's go back fundamentally to the issue of the technical expertise that is required. In my view, they are some of the key issues that do need to be resolved to resolve these remaining settlements of insurance in Christchurch.
Malola Malalea Ikasea.
I call the Honourable Eugenie Sage.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. The previous speaker, I